Okay, I think we are nearly there, so let's make a start. Thank you everybody for attending our Source Talks webinar today. We're just going to do a quick introduction before we start the main presentation. So my name is Rebecca Lauder-Fletcher and I'm the Head of Marketing at Source Group International. So for those attendees who are not familiar with the Source Group and our three brands, Source Technology, Explore Life Science and Scale Search. We are international recruitment specialists specializing in tech and life science recruitment. And at SGI, we're on a mission to achieve the highest level of customer service, driving sustainable improvement and investing in our people. So we're on a journey to discover our potential. And we're really passionate at SGI about engaging with communities and building valuable relationships. So we launched Source Talks Community during the height of the pandemic with the aim to bring together experts and leading professionals to discuss challenges and changes they face across their organizations. So with our main objective to pull back the curtain to technology and talent attraction and build a powerful community of people like yourselves on the same journey looking to achieve similar goals. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ben, who will introduce the main part of today's session. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks everyone for joining today for the first part of our Kotlin mini-series. My name is Ben Dow and I head up our UK software engineering division. Demand for the language has just been crazy in recent times. And what's really interesting is just the diversity in the client base. It's startups right through to tier one investment banks that are starting to adopt the language. And we're finding that engineers are really quite passionate about Kotlin. According to Stack Overflow, it's now the fourth most loved programming language. And whilst it might not be a reason alone to implement Kotlin, I think the passion in the engineering community is probably a good indicator that it's worth having a look at further. So as you probably know, Kotlin owes much of its growth to the Android community, but what we're really starting to see now is increased appetite for back-end use cases. And that's exactly what today's talk is going to focus on. So really excited to be joined by Jason Chow, who works as technical lead for FinTech 11FS. He has several years of hands-on experience with Kotlin and writes technical blogs on the subject, which I'd implore you all to check out when you get some time. Today's session is going to be talking us through a case study of how he helped N26, a challenger bank, adopt the language. He's going to be speaking to us for about 30 minutes and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So thanks very much, Jason. Over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Source Talk community, for having me here. And thank you, everyone who has joined this webinar. So this talk is mainly about me sharing the experience that I have when I do the transition myself in the backend land, and how does that change the way I work. So I'm glad to be here and to share my experience, also learn from you guys if you have anything you want to share, and also answer their questions. So here we go. So we start with something. So maybe start with a little bit of my background. So I started my career in 2001, about 20 years experience. My first programming language is actually BASIC, which I have the privilege to have an Apple II computer when I was really young. According to my father, I was 12 years old. And my first commercial language was Java. And today I just code in Kotlin. I was born in Hong Kong, but then I moved to London and worked in fintech afterwards. I specialize in low latency trading systems and banking systems. I'm a backend primarily, but before I was a little bit of full stack as well. So this talk is divided into three parts. The first part is why do we even move to Kotlin? What are the benefit of using that? And what about other choices? And from my experience, I come from Java background, so why did I change from Java to Kotlin will be mentioned there. And the second part will be my transitioning journey when I was at N26, and how does it go, and how do I accumulate all these things together. And the third part is mainly the sharing, like how would you plan to do that transition if it happened to be in your company or in your plan. So I mainly target on the backend engineers, maybe Java probably. Actually can be backend engineers in general. Also, you can be targeted to Kotlin engineers which have the similar journey as mine, developer of other JVM languages like Scala or Go or Groovy, so we can learn something from each other, like, how's your journey going? Also for engineering manager and architect that needs to plan how this to work, and also for non-stakeholder, that why is it important and how does it affect the ecosystem inside your company. So here we go. Let's start with the first part. Why do we even go from Java to Kotlin? Well, I think the major thing that I've learned is Kotlin is a lot more concise as a language and a lot more simplified. What does that mean is you type less for the same result. And it has a huge impact on how the productivity go, because you actually do less work, spend less time to do exactly the same thing. Because the language itself avoid a lot of boilerplate, and there's a lot of no enforcement check when it's compiler time. So you don't have to worry about now. Once it's compiled, you know that it's not going to be now. And there are a lot of like synthetic sugar, let's say, like built-in data classes, so you don't need any more Lombok. So it is also very, very easy to learn, because it's actually created from the JetBrains, which is the creator of the language. So they enable you to actually move to Kotlin from Java very easily. They actually have convert function there, but there's more to it. For my own experience, it's only take myself like 2 hours when I learn how to write Kotlin from Java, and then I start writing commercial code from that. And according also to the SNYK JVM ecosystem report this year, Kotlin actually is the most popular JVM language after Java. So you can see that means there's a lot of people doing Kotlin, writing Kotlin. That just means you have a lot of support from the community. That also means it's relatively easier to hire a Kotlin engineer if you compare to engineers of other JVM languages. It's also easy to hire a Java engineer and have them to pick up Kotlin. And the third thing, why is because of the interoperability. That just means you could have both languages in your repository at the same time, and you just work in harmony. That also allows you to continue to use your favorite frameworks. It's not like you have to learn everything from scratch, like have to read 3 books and do that. You can still use everything you already are using. It also enable you to have a continuous and gradual migration to Kotlin. That also imply your releases have lower risk, because you just change a little bit, change the part that you want to transition. You don't have to do everything in one go. So for that reason, Kotlin will be a very good candidate. And then you ask, why not others? My choice of going for Kotlin is more like a pragmatic reason, for the reason that I've mentioned before. Also, when we compare all these modern JVM languages, they all have their own benefit and merits there. But in terms of like learning curve, community support, ease of hiring, basically Kotlin will be the most pragmatic choice for me. It's just easier for everything to start with. And there's also a reason I will mention later why exactly I go for Kotlin, which related to my experience, why I do that. So my journey start from eavesdropping from a pantry debate in the company. They were arguing, they were doing Java at the time. So they were arguing, what's the next thing we should do? At that time, there was like a candidate, Kotlin, Scala, Closure. They really are passionate about what should be the next thing after Java. A lot of like, they really want to try it out in their production code. So as a result, I experimented myself in my project, but I did that only for internal tool, just to get, it's a low risk choice to just do that. Doesn't affect anything. Just try it out, the language. But it's not until the third phase when I actually have to do job interview. There was a role in N26 open as Kotlin engineers, but they will hire Java engineers. So as the preparation of this role, I actually start learning Kotlin. And they actually gave me a 48 hours coding challenge, which is entirely in Kotlin. So for myself, that's how I spent 2 hours in the learning. And then start writing code, complete the 48 hours coding challenge. And I was offered a job. So I actually start working in there. And during that time, N26 was going through the transition from Java to Kotlin. And that's come to my 4th stage, like actually doing that. And that's why I realized there's a lot more work than just the convert function in IntelliJ. It wasn't exactly trivial, but at the end, I work out a kind of routine, which I will share with you. How you do that and how you plan in the future, having all the lessons that I've learned, how do you do it faster next time? You don't have to go through all the pain that I've went through. You just learn from it and accelerate. And then I got into that rhythm of that conversion. And then I do it really well because everything is like well known. It's exactly the same thing. All the little gotcha I have to look for, all the little holes I need to look for, and it become very smooth in that transition. And then I changed job again. I joined 11FS. Now it's all about writing backend code in Kotlin, and I never looked back since then. So that's my journey, that from start to the end. So what's the result of what I've learned from all this transition journey? Then the first thing is very obvious is the code is a lot more readable. That means a couple of things. Code review is faster. It takes you short time. It's easier to do code review. It's easy to pair up with anyone. You spend less time talking about these kind of noises in your source code. You just focus on what matters. That was going well. And when we do the monitoring, for example, we can reduce a few of the monitoring, especially on when things are null, because there's no null anymore. Or I just do that when I talk to a remote system, you get a payload back, maybe there's null, but when it's in the system, when I say it's not null, it's not going to be null. So we reduce a lot of monitoring. It also helps us to troubleshoot any problem in shorter time, because you have just all the steps through is actually shorter, and it also means debugging is easier. It's also shorter time. For the service build, what I realized that actually no significant change. It's not better or worse. It's just around the same thing. Around the same time to the build, there is no particular benefit. But time to market is where I think where Kotlin will win like a landslide. In the past, when I was still working in Java, I was working in the monolithic service. The daily release is 0 or 1. If it's really very busy, it will be 2, and that's it. You can't do any more because of this kind of time spent on writing the code review. It takes a bit of time. After we moved to Kotlin, I realized we can do a lot more. All the cycle is shorter. Of course, give or take that we also have improved the pipeline in the meantime. At the end, we managed to do something like maximum maybe 6 deploy to production per day, but that's like max, not always doing that. And also with the improvement to the pipeline, give or take, give a pinch of salt, maybe half, like 3 at least. But it's like that 3 is due to the fact that there's a lot more Kotlin code in there. Everything is faster. It also changed the picture when it comes to recruiting and hiring. It's not better or worse, but the people you look for are different. You will be having more candidates that want to stay in Kotlin, or they want to learn about the new language. They want to have the commercial experience in Kotlin. You will attract the talent that are more progressive. They want to learn more, rather than the people who just want to stay in static quo. Also, you help the people's personal development in that sense, because you're giving them a goal to learn more about Kotlin, and it helps them to motivate them to go towards that goal. And for retention, there's no significant change, but the picture has changed. That means people left the company, but they rarely go back to Java. They either find Kotlin engineering job, or they will find other JVM languages to move on to. There are very few people who would actually go back to Java. So let's go to the planning. How do you want to do that? If you are thinking about it, or have started doing that, or have done a few of them, it is definitely not just as simple as IntelliJ right-click convert. There's a lot of things going on there, which for this session I will have it discuss in detail each one of them. I think the first thing you need is a timeline and the dependency and releases. I think that's super important. You have to understand how much risk you can take in doing that. Usually, I would always suggest people do a less risky releases and planning in that sense. That means a couple of things. That means you avoid starting that transition in the middle of the project. And that's very important. Once you start something, you're in the middle of that. Don't start the transition because that would cause a lot of confusion. You may have I have the Java version and I have the Kotlin version, and they may be doing the same thing. I'll have to do a lot of unification. And this causes a lot of confusion. People are not understanding what's going on. Should I convert this or not convert this? A lot of inconsistency going on. And the argument of framework in the middle of the transition is a bit fatal, I think, to the project. After all, it causes delay. I think that's the last thing we want. And also, my suggestion is to actually avoid having that transition to be done on some kind of core or critical projects. That's something that's really, really important, or has a unmovable deadline. Then we shouldn't stop. We shouldn't pick that as a first project. Pick something that's less important. Maybe some kind of add-on service, something like internal tools, something that could fail in a safety net. And that makes everyone less stressed, and they can spend more time in learning and doing it well. And also, the next thing you need to do is identify the dependency, and goes two ways. One is you ask yourself, are you depending on a particular language feature in Kotlin, or are you depending on a particular framework in Kotlin that provide you the feature that you need? If you are, look at their timeline, see when the feature they wanted might release. You can plan ahead with that. The other thing is other people depends on you, then you have to think twice. Do you want to actually do it right now? For example, like maybe your system, your service is not critical, but others who depends on you are critical, and they are in the middle of the project. Probably it's not a good time for your service to migrate to Kotlin. Or actually you're developing a library and you have a Java client there. You have to think twice if you really want to do that right now. And also for the release plan, really spend some time to think about how can I do smaller releases. Thanks to the interoperability, you can actually do that in small chunks. And how to select those chunks, which I will mention a little bit later, a bit of guideline how what the content you can consider when you choose how to divide your big releases, break it down into small chunks and low risk, and have a good night of sleep. After that, everything going smooth, then this is what you want. The next thing is I would think is how you ensure that your transition is smooth. We're doing that by good monitoring, alerting, and metrics. So not saying that you should change all that. All I mean is you should keep them. Keep the log message pretty much the same format. You may be able to reduce something due to like something not knowable anymore, but not much you can reduce. I would recommend you to keep on all this logging and monitoring and alert, such that you can see the difference before and after that transition. And we talk about how to break down into smaller releases, modules if one of the candidate. It doesn't have to be a business module. It can be. The other thing you can choose is, let's say I can pick a layer. Maybe it's my system integration. Maybe I have a little part that integrate with an external system, which I can convert entirely to Kotlin. But in general, it will be better to convert it from the outside to the inside. Think about it as an onion structure. You've got your maybe REST controllers, you have your file system, messaging, consumer. That when they're going in the system, it's a good candidate to start this kind of layering style of transition, and then go into the inside rather than from inside to the outside. That's what I would suggest, which I'll explain a bit more when we go to the production code. There's a reason for that. So talk about the actual code. I think there's 3 pillars that we need to consider. Firstly, is framework. I think it's super important because switching to a new language is not just a language. The framework, we will have a lot more choices of framework accessible to your engineers. I think in my experience, like a lot of engineers are getting very excited about it, probably too excited. And then the next thing you will see is a lot of arguments between people like, oh, we should use this, but the other ones actually use the other one. And they will have to fight against and so and so. It's a lot of distraction there. In general, I think it's good to look for framework. However, you cannot do too many because every new framework you bring in that language transition bring in a bigger scope, more delay, and more learning curve. So even though it's very exciting to see all this new framework, and actually a simple trick is there. A lot of the Java framework actually has a Kotlin module for this. Basically, it's more like syntax sugar that adapt to the language, so you can still use the framework, the same behavior, but in more like the Kotlin way, more the idiomatic expression way, which I'll come on the next. But before that, it's very tempting to switch big frameworks like Spring Boot, for example. And that is a very, very dangerous step to make. It's not impossible. It is possible. There's a lot of like so-called the Spring Boot replacing framework in Kotlin, like Ktor, HTTP4K, Micronaut, these kind of framework. They look very similar to Spring Boot. They don't do exactly the same as Spring Boot, and you'll be a wrong assumption to say, oh, let's just try, let's say Micronaut. It should behave exactly the same way as Spring Boot. No, it doesn't. And then you will find out during the learning process, and you get finding more and more discrepancy between the framework, and then you'll be like stuck in that position. There's also one famous saying about, I think it's called the Justin fence. So like, do not remove the fence until you know why it was there in the first place. This is what will happen if you choose an entirely new framework, assuming that it behaves the same. I think that's not, and you have to fight your way out, and it will be quite painful. So all in all, either you bring new framework but limit the number. Don't bring too many. I would say maybe 3 could be the limit, but there are exceptions to the rules. Or just go to Kotlin and find the Kotlin plugin or the optional library for the same framework. So coming to the idiomatic expressions, it's very important for engineers to not write Kotlin code the Java way. Just like in the past, don't write Java code in C++ way, because you're not learning anything. You're not actually adapting to the way it should work. So for every engineer, apart from the language syntax itself, learn how they usually express the language in different ways. It's more like learning a slang in a foreign language. You have to learn those things to be completely fluent in that. And the third thing is code convention, and that's when things can get a bit of chaos, but you can avoid it. And when people are arguing about where the brackets should be, and this kind of by shedding activity, focusing on something really not important. My suggestion is put in some kind of like check style kind of plug into your build, let's say Spotless or Kotlin, that kind of framework to actually stop this from the beginning. Because people are learning a new language, they don't actually have an opinion yet. Is it the perfect chance to actually for you to put that in place? Like if you are not coding in a certain style, you fail. And people are learning, just stick to that for now until you have a justification on why you want to do the other way around. That will help you a lot in terms of the learning, and everyone will try to learn to code the same way in that sense. So coming to the actual recipe of, let's say I have a Java file, how do I actually turn it into Kotlin? I have a few steps there I want to share with you. Of course, the first step is I will right-click in IntelliJ, convert it from Java to Kotlin. And after that, I will start to identify which parameters, which variables can be not knowable, because everything in Java is knowable, except primitive. This is a good opportunity to for you to identify, oh, actually, this never can be now. Just change it and change it all the way. And then after that, you have the compile time no check for you, which is great. And the next thing I will look at is the Java module, for example, or any members in Java class, they will convert to the var list in it, which you can consider changing that into a var, a kind of final in Java, and put it in a constructor. And that will help a lot in reducing that kind of the setter approach in Java. In Kotlin, you still use setter sometimes, but you mainly use it for data class instead. So the usage of setter is not that much in Kotlin. And because as a result of the remove of the knowable field, you will find a lot of check or no check in particular are not relevant anymore. Then you can remove it. And also at the same time, all this monitoring alert can be removed. And when you do of no check, make use of the Elvis operator, and then that will help to make the code more compact. The next thing you will look at is we probably have been using Lombok. It's time to not use Lombok for those classes and convert your POJO into data classes. There's also a change in terms of like moving a little bit towards the immutability. Doesn't mean you have to. You can still stay as immutable classes, but it will be something for you to consider. Like maybe it's good to be immutable in your case. It's something for you to think about. The next thing is you may have some kind of wrappers, because Java don't have like extension function, which Kotlin has, which means you have a wrapping around a external library just to the X bit that you want. In Kotlin, you can just use extension function. It would just do it like magic, like kind of extending the class in your syntax. It looks like it's the same thing. It's a good candidate for you to think about. Maybe it's time to remove all this wrapper. There's one key feature in Java, which is the attenuate operators. Like if it's true, do this, else do the other. We don't have this in Kotlin. You have to convert that into if else, but it's not a big job. It's a small thing. And the next thing I'll look at is the enum classes in Java. In Kotlin, there's something called seal classes, which is giving you a lot more guarantee that it will be handled exhaustively because of the seal class feature. If you're not handling all cases, it actually has a compiling error. So you have to go back and see and check and make sure you handle the case that you haven't handled. It's a good chance for you to actually look at that. If your choices are exhaustive, make it seal classes. And then you may find out you have a bug somewhere. So these are the typical routine I have when I convert it. But there could be more. Maybe sometimes people will look at coroutine or maybe do a suspend. But this is more like by choice rather than by default. It's something to consider. So for testing, it's a quite a tricky subject. The last thing you want actually is change your production code, change the test code, change the test case, change the test framework. And when things are not working, or things are working, you don't know why is it working or not working because everything changed. So in N26, what we did actually was we convert all the tests first. All the tests are converted to Kotlin as the first step. And then we're going to make sure that all these Kotlin tests are testing the Java code and testing the way we want it. Didn't think about that. Test is kind of low risk. You may think like, oh, if I change the test, how do I know it's working properly? If you're really concerned about that, you can actually do something like write mirror test. Basically, you have a Java test, you write another one in Kotlin, maybe using a new test framework as well, and then compare and learn at the same time. Oh, this is how we can use it in Kotlin. Now I'm showing this is the same behavior, and then you can remove the Java test. This is another way to for people to do it safely. After you've done that, after you've done all the tests, also do that for the whole test pyramid from unit test to end-to-end test. Then after you have done this journey, I think the team will have a pretty good idea how to write the Kotlin in production code, and also give you a safety net, because now we have a good test suite. If anything we've done has broken the functionality, you'll be caught, and you'll be the first one knowing it, not the customer. At the same time, like when you go to the that's one thing I should mention, that if you change the Kotlin test, obviously you will think about test framework. It's almost impossible to not change both at the same time. But you can, you still can, but it's you may be tempted to actually do both at the same time, which is okay. If you do that, make sure you do the mirror test, right? Keep the one in Java, do the one in Kotlin, new framework and new test code. If you just write it in Kotlin, you could get away with, or you don't use the Kotlin test framework, you can get away with the mirror test. So this is actually my actual experience. Like the transition is do the test first and then do production code, which I think worked pretty well in the company. This is another approach of the how to migrate to a different language, which is extract that to a separate microservice and write everything in Kotlin over there, which is a totally sensible choice. At the same time, this is actually more to do with microservice extraction than the language. But by doing that, you give you a lot of freedom to choose the framework. As it's also a safe area for people to learn and fail. It's very important because it's a microservice extraction. You have to do your dependency analysis, rollout plan, rollback plan, choice of tools and frameworks. I think the most important thing is keep the scope really small. So you have a really good small space to learn and fail. And also really important to have a rollback plan, because you can just, if it doesn't work, just maybe feature flag, switch back to old way and learn again, bring it up again when it's ready. And the testing needs to be also in place. And in that case, it would be more like end-to-end test to ensure that the overall system behavior is the same. It's totally doable. I actually have done that as well. And just be careful about the tools and framework. Don't go too crazy about new frameworks and new tools. And then what happened is, this is what I realized, well, the last thing I realized when I do the transition is it actually affects hiring interview. I think firstly, we have to identify, what are we hiring contractors or permanent? If you're hiring contractor, you have a less of a problem, because you can just say, I would like to hire contractors who already have spent time in learning Kotlin and they're already good. And that's less of a problem. For permanent, then you have to adapt a different strategy. So one of the strategy people use is, of course, they hire Kotlin engineer that already have the Kotlin commercial experience. that works for sure. You should also consider hiring Java engineers and give them some time to pick up the new language. Usually, when they have a strong Java background, they usually pick it up pretty well. So there's not much of the problem. You can also hire Android engineers because they are familiar with the language, but not the framework in the backend. They also work. Or actually engineers with great problem-solving skill in general, because if you start to learn from scratch or even from a non-JVM language, it is not that hard to actually learn from that. It also will work. It will just take a little bit more time because of the lack of the experience in the framework more than the language itself. The language itself is not a big deal. It's all the tools around it, since if they're coming from a non-Java background. For that, we also have to consider, like, if you hire a permanent staff as a Kotlin engineer and they're only having a Java experience, during the probation period, you may want to monitor the learning progress and maybe make it a criteria. You have to learn to a certain level in Kotlin to be able to pass probation. That's something you need to consider when you transition to that. And also the interview needs to be adjusted a little bit. Of course, the material has to be adjusted. You might have two sets of interview questions. You may have the programming exercise. You allow them to answer in either Java or Kotlin language. And the last one is the growth and development. I would recommend any engineers who just try to go to the Kotlin world, really put your goal as a personal development plan to learn Kotlin. Learn it from the book, from the internet, from a forum, and also attend those forums and talk to your line manager to set up the objective. Make sure they're aware that you're learning this and your process being tracked, and get some sponsor to help you to learn faster. And on the business level, one thing really important is actually to document your journey. What are the difficulty you faced, how do we get through those things? Recording the journey is really useful for the next time you make another language change or any like big framework change, because you kind of, the checklist is pretty much the same, maybe a few variations, but having that experience documented help you to think, oh, I can do it again, but I have to look after these aspects. And at the organizational level, we should be ready to work with a new pool of talent, because they're actually slightly different people. You will start to have access to a different type of people, basically the people that want to learn more progressive, or want to invent more. And on the community level, because it's kind of still a new thing, it's not new, but it's kind of new. We should encourage people to actually contribute to, for example, a framework, or open source frameworks, to have more contributor to these frameworks. And maybe one day you will feedback to your company, say, actually, because of this feature, now I can use this framework. So it's like a two-way street. You help each other in that sense. So at the end, thank you very much for your time. Actually, we are also hiring 11. 11 is also hiring Kotlin engineer. So I put the contact there. So you want to contact us, feel free to do that. And I've also put a link there about the blog I've written about using Kotlin for banking industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Jason. There's one question that I can already see in the chat, but if you just want to pop any questions in the Q&A box, and we'll start going through them. So anonymous attendee has asked, let's say I have to choose a JVM-based modern language for my existing project, which is Java 11. Choices which I have are Kotlin, Scala, and Clojure. I've worked in Scala before, and I do find Kotlin syntax simpler than Scala. Is there any other reason why you would pick Kotlin? I mean, any other feature which makes Kotlin superior to Scala or Clojure?
Yes, I think it's not a particular feature. It's more like the flexibility. I think that is the major reason. Because I think Scala is a lot more opinionated in that way. Like even if you write in object orientation, people still use the functional approach. In Kotlin is a lot less to learn, fewer blocks to in your way to get your stuff out. Because itself is I think Kotlin, the language itself, is just trying to be helpful, trying to be efficient, trying to be productive, trying to write less code for the same thing. If you go for something like a Scala, I think you have to do firstly the language transition, and you have to start to, at least to be able to read a functional code. That would be a little bit of the problem. It's not impossible, it's still possible. It's just more stuff to add on the table you have to take care of. The major thing I like about Kotlin, of course, is the node check, the extension function, the coroutine that is also actually drive people to think about how can I do that this way, and a bit of the immutability hinting that you could do it that way. Even though in object-oriented world, it's still useful because it's help you to think, oh, this is more predictable. I think the whole idea is to make things more predictable. We kind of shift left paradigm is like everything go towards the compile time check. When I compile it, I have all these guarantees done. So I can be sure that things will behave in a certain way.
Thanks, Jason. So a question from Duncan was around recruitment, actually. So I guess I'll give my two cents on it whilst I'm here. But essentially asking, can we actually hire Kotlin contractors, as it seems they're just as scarce as permanent people? So I guess my experience so far is yes, but you need to do two things. The contracts need to be outside IR35, and you need to pay well. Clients that we have that are doing those things are having success, but we're kind of finding that a firm will hire sort of a few experienced contractors, and then sort of once those are in, then start to hire Java developers that they can train up, so they've got some existing experience, and then can train the others up as they go. But Jason, I don't know if you have any thoughts on.
Yes, I do actually.
Yeah.
I did interview some of the contractors as Kotlin engineer. I actually hired 2-3 of them. They were contractors, and some of them actually have no experience in Kotlin. And of course, when they do that, that means they have to spend time elsewhere to learn the language. And so far, I was doing well. I mean, all you're looking for, even if they don't have Kotlin experience, you're looking for a strong foundation in Java. As long as they're strong enough, they can pick it up quickly. And of course, with contractor, they can do it in their own time. But in general, it works.
Thanks, Jason. So another question. What was your best way of learning Kotlin? Book, video, or forum? As you said, you managed to sort of get a grasp within 48 hours. What's the best way to learn it quickly, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, the usual one. Actually, it's nothing special about it. Of course, the Kotlin official web page, the learning page, does help a lot. That's my main source of learning. Of course, you can do things like Googling Stack Overflow. It's not a particular source or the magical source somewhere that nobody ever know. It's all out there. I would say that to experiment more, I think that's what I want to say. Write something in Java that you're familiar with. Write something in Kotlin and do something conversion and compare. I think the best learning is how do you write Kotlin like a Kotlin engineer would do, like writing that language in a sense, it's an idiomatic expression, like how to write it in the not even standard. It's not like more like using the right language correctly. Even though you use the same word, you can still go around and just write a completely C++ code. I think that part you can learn from looking at open source project, their source code, looking at the all these kind of tutorial online. I mean, they're all good, and it's quite accessible to everyone as well.
Thanks for that, Jason. I might actually ask you for some GitHub projects to check out and maybe share them with the attendees as well afterwards. So another question here. Thanks very much for all the advice. Really helpful when coming from Java. Their story is a bit different though, and this particular person is deciding to move from Ruby and Rails to Kotlin and Spring Boot. Wondered if you had any particular advice or pitfalls to avoid that you could share. Something I found to be true, and you've already mentioned, is that the language itself is not that hard to grasp. The framework, though, being a different story, much harder. Anything else that you can add to this?
Yep. Actually, also for the language itself, I think Ruby is a dynamically typed language, just like Python. When you're moving from a dynamic type to static type language, that part itself is also a paradigm change. People may not be super familiar with strong type. Maybe they have worked with database and they will have some strong type syntax in there. I think if you're coming from Ruby or any other dynamic type language, being always have to be strong type maybe is a little bit inconvenient for some people in the beginning, but it's not much of the problem once you get to the rhythm. It's just that, yeah, you have to always ask what's the type of this. And also, as I mentioned, the language itself is not a problem. It's the framework is being the bigger problem. All the tools are new, basically. So it would take a lot more steps to get familiar with the framework. And in that sense, if you're coming from that kind of background, I would suggest you use really Java framework, like Spring Boot, everything in Java, because when you use Kotlin library, for example, what you will find out, okay, first of all, there's a lot of them. Everyone wants to replace any Java counterpart library. And you will find out that, oh, there's 6 libraries in Kotlin. They try to replace that one Java library. And if you look at the contributors, some of them have many, some of them have not many. And you have no idea when they will release another one. If you ask a question, would you get an answer? There's a lot of uncertainty in there. But if you go back to Java, there's always someone working on that already. Your problem is always old problem. Then you don't have to really solve that in that sense. Like you don't have to fix the framework yourself. But for the keen people, they may want, oh yeah, let me jump to that and fix it. Just be very careful of this framework in general.
Thanks for that, Jason. So great question here from Duncan, who's asked to plug his and Nat Price's new book, Java to Kotlin, a refactoring guidebook. People seem to like it. Yes, absolutely, we can plug that, and we can send it around to all attendees as a good resource afterwards. And as I say, this is going to turn into a mini series, so we'll be hosting a monthly webinar on Kotlin, and Duncan, perhaps you can jump on one of those and share your learnings from the book with us. I think that's it now for questions. We've coming up to 2 o'clock, so I guess we'll wrap things up. As a follow-up to the event, as I say, we are going to be running these now monthly, so we'll send around the next day in due course, so please do keep an eye out. The next session we might look at doing something perhaps from, I guess this is looked at implementing from a business perspective, but we might do one that's more developer focused, quite technical, and really try and help Java developers that are looking to go down to that route and helping with the learning curve a little bit. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks so much, Jason, for your talk. It's been really, really insightful. And if anyone has any further questions that they've not come up now, then please do reach out, and I'll be happy to loop you in with Jason and get them answered for you. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.